Community Manager of Bapti Online. This is our regular online collaboration event where we invite key industry experts to share their expertise and experience on specific topics. We would encourage you to be interactive as possible by sharing your own experiences as well during our Q&A at the end. Our guest speakers have taken the time to tell you how they have approached their own challenges, but in a community where we like to share and solve business issues, it is nice to hear everyone's views. Today we are delighted to have Tim Warner, UK Country Manager of Finjan. Tim joined Finjan in 2002 and he has witnessed the evolution occurring in the threat vector over the last 5 years, and he has become one of Finjan's leading European consultants on web-based threats and countermeasures available to businesses dealing with them. Tim is a seasoned IT professional with over 18 years' experience in the IT industry, the last 7 of which have been spent in the Internet and the Internet security technology sectors. So during Tim's presentations, all the lines are muted, and we would ask you to save your questions until the end when we can debate them amongst all the participants. During the presentation, if you have any problems or queries, you can use the chat facility or the questions facility by just typing in your questions. We can also use this facility to log questions that you want answered at the end of the presentation. This presentation will be made available to everyone who attends the webinar today, so don't feel that you have to write everything down. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Tim.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you everybody for joining in on this webinar. So as the title says, I'm going to be talking about criminal e-commerce and web models and techniques being used to support it. Just move on to the next agenda slide, and I'll show you exactly what we're going to be going through the presentation. So the topics we're going to cover, the first topic we're going to talk about is e-criminal commercial activities, what they're doing in that kind of side of things from the web perspective. I'm then going to spend some time explaining to you how the crimeware side of things is fragmented and the supply chain specialisation actually happening in that area. Then I'm going to go through some techniques, some of which you may be familiar with, some of which may be new to you, that are being used in the web environment to actually infect people. And I'm going to finish off with a few threat conclusions and best practices and protection options that are available for us. So, given it's 5 o'clock, let's move on. So in terms of criminal commercial activities, the crimeware stuff that we're seeing today is breaking down into a number of different segments. The obvious one that everybody's seeing, talking about in the news and seeing out there is phishing and ESET, whether it be normally personal bank account information, credit card information, that sort of stuff. Obviously the minor sort of stuff going on out there about software and games license keys, maybe PayPal accounts, maybe Amazon, Pay.com, that sort of stuff. What we're seeing in the theft world is not just the standard phishing attack that everybody's sort of known and seen in the press. It's not just the email pretending to be your bank coming through. What we're now actually seeing is an email or a socially engineered email or instant message coming through, which is basically got nothing in it at all saying about banks. It's socially engineered to maybe look like a news story or something to do with celebrity. Maybe it's got information about Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, for example. So the unsuspecting person will click on that, go through to the website, and that website's been created at that point with lots of nice graphics and content about maybe the celebrities. And from there, it's taking advantage of a day zero attack to download a keylogger, which will then sit silently on the user's machine, waiting for the next time that they're either going to go onto the bank or maybe onto Amazon or something else. I mean, in that scenario, the sort of standard best practice of saying don't click when you see an email coming from your bank doesn't work. There's nothing that the user's seen whatsoever to do with the bank. The next couple you've seen on the slide there are to do with socially sensitive goods, whether it's actually the delivery of socially sensitive goods or actually the promised delivery, which actually turns out to be a fraudster. The fraudster side's very easy. They assume that basically if you're too embarrassed to buy this sort of stuff from a shop, you probably aren't going to complain to the authorities if it doesn't turn up. That also leads into things like blackmail. Now, the blackmail side, we see three different areas, really. We see the small side of the side things, the ransomware you might have, where people are encrypting files, and from that, basically they're charging a small amount of money for you to unencrypt that file and get your information back. On the other end of the scale, we're seeing large botnets being used to actually attack e-commerce sites, gambling sites, online sites. And what they're actually saying to them is, look, pay us an amount of money and we won't attack you. historically that used to be quite a large amount of money. There was examples of casinos and things like this being charged for $200,000-$300,000. But actually where that's moved to today is a very small amount of money, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. And they've moved it down to a small amount of money because they put it at the pain point when someone's looking at it and going, well, it's more painful for me to actually set up a protection against this than it would actually be to actually pay them. The middle one's fairly rare, thankfully, but this is when we see people deliberately going after high-profile figures. So, for example, they might research a blue-chip company. They'll find the chairman or a member of the board. They'll look at the photograph on the website of that person. They will literally research that person. They will follow them home. They will try and build a profile of where that person goes to, what they're into, what hobbies they've got. Once they've discovered all that sort of stuff, they will try and actually make physical contact with the person, usually by putting over, sitting near them in a club or a place that they go to, and having identified what they're into, broker a conversation around that area, and then pass over a website details of that site or of that hobby, and suggest the person goes there. That site's been completely and utterly created for them, and when they go there, the first thing it does is to identify or try to identify what security measures are in place already on that executive's desktop, and the payload that it's trying to deliver is actually a set of child pornography photographs. Obviously, child pornography and paedophilia, in the UK at least, is a criminal act, which means that people can go to jail for it. What will then follow that attack is within the next 24 hours, the person's getting a phone call basically saying, unless you pay in the region of, and the sums I've heard of are £50,000, basically we are going to tell the board of directors, we're going to tell your wife, whose name is X, you live at Y address, and we're going to send things through to the kids. The last area you've got on here is stock market manipulation. Stock market manipulation is what is commonly known in the press as pump and dump scams. Again, they're using a large botnet, which is a collection of zombie machines under the control of a group of individuals, to actually flood the market with spam messages saying this stock is about to go through the roof, and you can make a lot of money on it. They basically invest to begin with, buy a large amount of stock. They wait for the stock to zoom up, usually only over a couple of hours, and then they will sell their stock. The result being that the company involved finds their share price suddenly zooming up unwarrantedly and then going down. Individuals and the company both lose out. So these are some of the criminal commercial activities we see behind the scenes. Following on from that, though, is this fragmentation that we're saying is happening in the market in terms of supply chain specialisation. This is a good sign of a maturing market. The first thing I'm going to show you on there is vulnerability research and resale. And I've got a few examples that we've brought from our Malicious Code Research Centre that does primary research, showing different vulnerabilities that basically have been in the market and are actually sold by individuals who research them. When you talk about hackers and things like this, the average individual on the street would have this image probably of someone like Matthew Broderick sitting in a bedroom late at night, not seeing much sunlight, basically researching, trying to hack into a big organisation. But today in the market, you've actually got two or three different sections out there. You've got the set of people that are actually doing nothing but trying to find a vulnerability. The going rate at the moment for a vulnerability on Vista that's not in the public domain is $75,000. That's how much the black market will pay if the vulnerability is not known in general in the market. And obviously taking that vulnerability to then go and exploit it. You've also got specific or groups, organised crime, that are researching the vulnerabilities themselves internally and not buying it on the back end sort of, you think of it as eBay for the criminals, but basically the different blogs and different security threads that are going on the back of the market. So this is a very it's a very fastly maturing market. We actually, because we do malicious code research, have had our own teams approached by the Russian mafia actually. Each time do two completely separate instances with different vulnerabilities being they've been offered in the range of $30,000 a piece for these different vulnerabilities. Obviously, we reported them to the authorities, but it shows you that this is out there and kicking. The next stage we're seeing out there is we're seeing people that are now taking things like vulnerabilities, taking their skills and being able to exploit those vulnerabilities and creating web attacker toolkits. So the next batch of slides that I've put together here for you include things like rootkits. So this particular site, you can see very clearly here, web attacker IE064. It's basically coming from a Russian site. I don't speak Russian. I'm not sure if we have any Russian speakers on the call. But if we look at the next few slides, you can see exactly how they're putting it together. Here you can see that there's an e-commerce application there. You can download and buy whichever version you want to buy. There are 3 different versions up here. The one down here, actually, it's a $300 version, is one that basically you can purchase, and they're guaranteeing to update the product for you with all the updates and new vulnerabilities as it goes through, which shows you basically that this is a business. It's not a one-off transaction. Behind the scenes, once you've actually got this product, you can put it onto your website. You can basically then click and tick what it is that you want to do to the people visiting your site. You do not have to be a programmer or someone expert at being able to take advantage of a vulnerability. Following on that, you've actually got all the nice sort of reports and statistics that you expect in a proper product. Just move the product on here. A little delay here. Basically, you've got nice statistics and graphs that you can actually get the product to show you. A little bit of a problem here, Lisa. There we go. So overall statistics on this particular slide, we can show you on the left-hand side, Windows 98, they're saying that they've managed to actually infect 24 different machines using the MS0311 vulnerability, quite an old vulnerability. But again, you can see from these statistics and these graphs that it's quite a nicely well put together reporting engine that's included in the product. Behind that, you've then actually got all the different frequently asked questions and support pages, again in Russian, that you'd expect from a product. This, to me, the analogy I've been using recently is like people making guns. The gun manufacturer themselves, they basically aren't doing anything illegal. They probably have a license to make it, and they sell it onto a gun shop. This is the sort of gun shop stage of it, where you're selling that on to them. They're creating a product, and they're selling that to someone else to use. They're not actually using it themselves. And it's the last piece in the chain that's actually pulling that trigger, which is obviously doing the illegal thing in most countries. The next stage we have here is paper infection models. So these are models where basically they create code, like we just seen there, and they send this code out, and they actually talk to webmasters and say, look, we will pay you an amount of money per every infection that you manage to get onto someone visiting your site. So at the top here you can see they're actually quoting here that they have an infection rate of between 30 and 45%, sometimes as high as 48%. They're paying in euros, so saying the minimum sum is 50 euros. They have guarantees in terms of how fast that they're actually going to pay you by online transactions. And they're boasting about the fact that it's only sort of 3 kilobits in size, and it will delay the time between when it's downloaded to the user and before it actually does what it's designed to do. If we go into the next slide here, I'm just going to look at rates. They're actually charging or paying different rates depending on where the website owner manages to infect. So if you infect someone in China, they're actually only going to pay 5 euros per infection. If they pay someone, if you infect someone in Asia, it's 10 euros, and the rest of the world are willing to pay 40 euros. Why? Because very simply they can make more money out of people in the first world and in Europe and US than they can in developing countries. When we actually go in a little bit further and look to see where this code is coming from, you can actually see on this next slide that it's coming from the center of Moscow. Again, just waiting for the slide to move on. I think Lisa's going to move the slide on for me. Thank you. What you're going to see here is an IP address mapping, which is showing us in the center of Moscow City. And here you can see the Google Earth map type stuff showing exactly where it is. It's right in the middle of the center of Moscow where this is coming from. All the IP addresses on here are accurate, as are the links. So I would caution people downloading this presentation afterwards that the links and stuff within here, for matters of accuracy, are actually going to have the code behind them. The second example I have here for you on a paper infection. Again, this one is boasting about its percentage download, anywhere from 10 to 40% this time round. Again, they are saying they have daily updates for it. And here you can see in the small box here in terms of their rates, they're actually paying per 1,000 downloads. So at the moment, they are paying $500 per 1,000 downloads for infections in Australia. They're paying $400 per 1,000 downloads in the UK, but only $120 per 1,000 downloads in the US. And very quickly you can look at this and say, well, look at where they're actually planning to try and hit next. But, they're actually targeting specific countries where they actually want to hit. So that's some examples of how people are using these vulnerabilities, how the crimeware is developing in the market. Again, this one, you just see the global maps on here. This is St. Petersburg, this time, again in Russia. What I'm now going to start going through, though, is the techniques that they're using to get this crimeware down onto people's machines. Get the slide to come on. Okay, here we go. So we're going to explore about 7 different techniques going through this presentation. We'll start with some that you may have seen before, some that are fairly simple actually in essence, moving up to some very complicated ones that we're seeing in the last 2-3 months. In fact, there's one here that we reported in our Q2 trends report in the last 2 days. The first one I'm going to talk about is a technique called fragmentation. The particular site we're looking at here is taking advantage of 2 different vulnerabilities, the vulnerability numbers of which are at the top of the slide, both vulnerabilities from 2004. This site is actually nearer to 20 to 22 months old now. It's a site called troyanov.net, which you can see in the middle of the screen here. I'm not actually a technical person, but this is the actual exploit code that's residing on the troyanov.site. Now, what we're going to do on the next slide is we've cut and paste this exploit code into a well-known site on the internet called virustotal.com, which are actually able to analyze in real time what that code would be found on against a different number of antivirus vendors. You may expect with something which is 18 months old, 20 months old, that all of the antivirus vendors are going to stop that code. Unfortunately, that's not true. You can see from here that out of the 29 different antivirus vendors which this code has then been sent against their antivirus engines, this was done exactly the 18th of December 2006 at 3:15. At that point, only 9 out of 29 antivirus vendors were successfully detecting this code. Today it should be 100% because behind the scenes, what virustotal.com do is send a copy of that exploit to the antivirus vendor so they can create a signature. But what I'm going to show you next is a technique called fragmentation. And fragmentation is basically just making the code look different. The actual impact, the payload, is exactly the same. So we can see in the middle here what we're doing is adding a number of plus signs. The simple version is to say, okay, 5 plus 5 is 10, but 2 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 is also 10. It just looks different. And this technique is being used to try and avoid antivirus signatures. Above this, we've also used a dummy string, which actually does nothing whatsoever to the code. When we've cut and pasted this code into virustotal.com, unfortunately at that point, none of the antivirus vendors pick it up. Fragmentation is a common technique that we're seeing in all of our worldwide audits that we're doing at the moment, which the dark side, as I would call it, are using to try and circumnavigate the obviously the most standard security platform out there, which is antivirus. The next one I'm going to come on to is a technique that we're seeing being used to circumnavigate URL filtering vendors' products, many of which I'm sure you're using in your organizations. What we're going to look at here is a search engine cache. So the first example I've got, and I have 3 of these for you, is for Yahoo. So many of you may have used the cached content highlighted here in red on a search engine, basically to improve the speed of delivery of the content rather than go to the originating site itself. So in this first example, I'm just going to do some continuity here, and we're looking at the troyanov.net site. And what we've done is we've clicked on that cached content. When we click on that cached content, funnily enough, it's actually providing to us the troyanov.website. Now, if you were to visit this site through the majority especially URL filtering vendors, they will categorize it as a known spyware malicious website. But because we've accessed it in the Yahoo site, what you can see on the next slide is here's the URL string. You can clearly see yahoo.com at the top, trojanov.net down the bottom, and basically this URL filtering engine is categorizing it as a search engine portal because of Yahoo. And worse is saying, well, actually, because it's a search engine portal like Yahoo, we're not going to allow you to send information in to recategorize it. I've got several other examples for you. Here's an example using a different site this time. Installer.net's a site that's been around for approximately 5 to 6 months, and this time we're using MSN. Again, when we click on the cached content, we have no idea where this particular cache is residing in Microsoft's infrastructure, but again, it's serving out the actual exploit, which is taking advantage of an IE VML vulnerability. And on the next version, we're now looking at Google, just to complete the set of the big three. Again, we're clicking on cached, and again, when we actually go to the cached content, just wait for the presentation to catch me up, we're seeing, one too far, we're actually seeing the actual attack coming down from Google. So basically, this is a technique that we're seeing as I say, in every one of the audits we're doing today, and in all of the meetings I've had in the last 6-9 months since we saw this technique starting to be used, I haven't seen anybody yet that would say, yes, we block access to Yahoo, Google, or MSN. So moving on from that, the next technique we're going to talk about is Ajax. Ajax is one of the technologies that is closely associated with what people are talking about being Web 2.0 out there. Ajax is actually a technique that is, or a technical ability to update the browser without you needing to click refresh on the browser. It was designed, and it is being used effectively by many organizations, but it was designed for things like news or weather, or maybe it's share trading information coming through. Here we can see a website which is using Ajax. I'm just going to go to the next slide for you. This particular site is hosted right slap bang in the middle of Washington. So again, you'd say it's one of the areas in the world that you would say is probably safer for this kind of thing. But on that page is basically an Ajax code, which is, you can't see the bits that are being cut off at the top here, but basically the Ajax code is allowing the web page itself to go and retrieve a Trojan which is residing on a server located in Moscow. In fact, you may have noticed from the image, it's exactly the same place in Moscow. So if we get rid of that and go on to the next stage, basically the user is seeing a web page that they believe is coming specifically from some site with .com at the end of it, hosted in Washington, but they're actually now receiving a Trojan which is being live or loaded into that page from a server located in Russia. And again, Ajax is a common technique that we'll see a few times in the more sophisticated attacks, and I'll show you later. The next one we're going to show you is a dynamic page coding technique. This particular page that I'm showing you is actually not malicious. There may be some technical people on the call that will realise that. This was sent to us by a very large police force in the UK that was attacked using this technique, and basically it was a targeted attack on them, and they wanted to find out whether we'd stop the technique. So what you can see at the top of the slide in this first blue box is some code. In fact, it's not code because it's in the pre-tag forms, which basically means this is what you would see on the web page if you visit that web page. But it's actually formatted as clear text with the pre-tags. Supplementally, hidden on the screens that you wouldn't see is this JavaScript, and the JavaScript is basically creating an element, it's calling it a script, it's turning that script into a JavaScript, and it's doing some clever replacement, and then appending the JavaScript to this piece of code in the middle of the page. By doing this, what's happening is, as the web page comes down into the browser, first of all, the antivirus engine, usually on the desktop, would look at this. It would look at this top section here and say, you're plain text. I don't scan plain text. It would then look at the JavaScript, which is what it's designed to do, and say, okay, what do I do with this piece of JavaScript? And it would follow through the actions of that JavaScript onto the actual page. The antivirus engine would look at this and go, well, you're not a known virus. I don't recognize you. You're just a normal piece of JavaScript doing something on the page. And what you've actually created here is an attack which is dynamically coming together in the web browser behind the security level of the antivirus engine. As I say, this is a targeted attack. This is an example of the same technique used as a targeted attack that we saw in a very large police force in the UK. The next one we're going to talk about, and that technique was within the last 6 months, by the way. The next one we're going to talk about is code obfuscation and dynamic code obfuscation. At the Info Security show that Finjan was at, we had a malicious code museum where we were showing examples of this. But many people actually coming up to us and hadn't heard about code obfuscation. Given the nature of this audience, I'd expect most of you probably do understand what that is, but I'll take you through it just briefly in case you don't. Code obfuscation is a way of almost encrypting code on the page so that you get random alphanumeric content being displayed. Here we've highlighted the function V at the beginning and an eval function. Basically, with code obfuscation, what they are doing is they are almost encrypting this content, they're obfuscating it so you can't see what's sat behind it, and they are passing with it the deobfuscation string to be able to bring it back into the clear. When we deobfuscate this piece of code, which our product does live in real time, you see that the actual code is trying to do a document write. It's actually taking advantage of this Microsoft Windows WMF arbitrary code execution vulnerability to download a virus. This has all been behind code obfuscation. Moving on from there, here's an example of code obfuscation now being used in a paper infection model. So again, you have random alphanumeric text at the top. This particular attack is using a different vulnerability in the IE. It's using AJAX now to remotely fetch a malicious executable, a Trojan, and then it's taking 2 more vulnerabilities to finish its work. It's basically a phishing attack. Moving on to the next one, we're now going to look at dynamic code obfuscation. Now, dynamic code obfuscation is basically when each time a visitor visits the page will display different content. It will obfuscate the code live, real-time, differently. So what we've done, and again, please advise caution here, we've taken this website and we've basically gone and visited the website in successive minutes, 3 different times on the 15th of April. And when we go on to the next page, you can now see this is the actual code that we were able to, was sent down to us in these each 1-minute intervals. You can clearly see in these boxes that we've highlighted for you in the red and the yellow that the code is actually showing differently. Now behind this code, you've actually got a fairly nasty piece of work. There are actually 10 different executables that are hidden in this obfuscation, and they're basically trying to take advantage of the machine, trying to turn the machine into a zombie, doing phishing attacks, and a whole raft of other different things. What we've done is taken this particular code I've just shown you and then cut and paste it again back into our friends at virustotal.com to say, well, how many antivirus engines that are looking at this would actually pick this up? So this is the first one that we've cut and pasted into here, and at this point you can see that 5 of them actually managed to identify it, all actually using the same signature or same virus. When we cut and paste the second version in, which is when you're visiting the page in the second minute, you're now seeing that only 2 are stopping it, and unfortunately by the time we cut and paste the third version in, nobody's picking this up. And that's what dynamic code obfuscation has really been designed for, so that it can circumnavigate antivirus vendors' products. Theoretically, you can take any known virus, obfuscate it in this kind of method in a dynamic code obfuscation, and it will circumnavigate the antivirus vendor's products. That said, obviously, the little bit of relief is, of course, that many of these old viruses might not work against current vulnerabilities. So moving off of, well, actually, before we move off of that, this may seem like a fairly rare or boutique type of thing going on. Unfortunately, it's not. This is information coming from our Q1 trends report, and what we're seeing here is code obfuscation. We saw 7,350 unique examples of when code obfuscation was used as a technique, compared with the next 9 of the top 10 techniques. You can clearly see here that code obfuscation as a technique for delivering threats is being used 10 times approximately more than the next nearest technique, and in fact more than the next 9 techniques put together. The other interesting thing you'll see on the right-hand side here is that we are actually looking at the category of sites where these URLs are mostly done. So the largest category of sites, and the majority of the sites were coming from streaming media sites. Advertising is where it's using it. And again, you can also see on there before I move off kids sites and reference sites that it's coming, other different threats are coming from. Not your traditional sort of gambling, pornography, and other sites. We're now going to move on to looking at actually where malware is coming from, where it's being hosted, and what kind of categories it's coming in. So this is, again, from our Q1 Trends report. You can see here that when we analyse where this code is coming from, there is a common misconception out there that a lot of this content is hosted in Russia, or the Eastern Bloc, or Singapore, or China. Obviously, yes, there is malicious code hosted in there, but you can see from this particular graph, the majority of the audits that we brought together to create this were from English-speaking countries. And you can see that 70% of the malware that we discovered was actually being hosted in the United States, closely followed by Canada with 10% and the United Kingdom with about 6%. So you can see from here, 86% of the malware that we discovered was actually being hosted with a URL, usually with .com or .co.uk at the end of it. Again, the next thing you might think of is, oh, that's okay, I'm using URL filtering and I'm probably going to stop this stuff. But again, as I just mentioned, it's not normally coming from sites which are gambling sites or pornography sites or sites with weapons or hate speech on it. It's coming from sites that I'm fairly much sure that most of the people on this call will be allowing as categories that their users are allowed to go to. Things like real estate and education, travel, investment. Some of you might be blocking advertising, but advertising is a very nasty one because basically most web pages today have advertising banners and advertising on it because that's one of the main e-commerce mechanisms running behind the internet where people are making money out of their websites. And from what we're seeing here, 80% of the malware we saw in Q1 was actually being embedded in a malicious advert, and it's not something you would see actually on the host page itself. I've got a couple of examples actually of the commercial advertising. We thought it was such a strong area that we ought to bring it out. Here's an example of a site that we've discovered in the US called Google.com. Again, it was found in one of our live audits as per all of the different slides that I'm showing you today. This particular advert looks quite normal, but when you look at it, here we've got the market-leading URL filtering vendor with over 50% market share sitting there and saying, yep, we categorize it as an advertising site. They're not categorizing it as a malware site. But when you look behind it, this particular site is exploiting a day zero attack, an animated cursor exploit. It's using Ajax to download a Trojan that will basically run on the PC without the person knowing, collecting their passwords and financial data from the machine. We've actually contacted the owner of this site, and in fact over 10 times, and to date we still haven't had a single return phone call. Moving off of that one, you might say, okay, well, that could be coming from a small site. What I'm showing you here is coming from one of the top 10 US websites. This is the National Football League in the States. This is actually, we're using here you can see we're using a class ID. Again, it's not just us, it's McAfee and Castlecops also agree. This is 100% guaranteed spyware coming from one of the top 10 websites in the States. The answer to how is basically it's coming through the advertising banner. When we actually met with the prospect that was doing an audit to see what kind of things are coming into their network, they saw this and they said to us, well, we assumed that the National Football League was a false positive of some sort. We couldn't believe that spyware was coming from it. What was happening here is somewhere downstream, behind the NFL, you have a large advertising aggregator that's talking to smaller aggregators, small companies, big ones like Sony, Pepsi, Coke, that might want to be advertising on the NFL. And there's a commercial model there where they're being paid more by the sponsors than they are paying to the website owner. At some point, one of the adverts that they're pushing through to the NFL has actually had dynamically some spyware installed into it, which is coming all the way through from the source and origin and appearing on the NFL site. And of course, the majority of users visiting this site have absolutely no idea that code's coming from different places. They believe that everything on the NFL site is coming from the NFL. The next one I've got for you is one that hit the press a few months ago. And this is an example of how the Miami Dolphins website got attacked approximately 2 to 3 days, well, that's when they actually discovered it, before the actual Super Bowl. And what they managed to do is actually get some code on there. Again, you can see the vulnerability numbers here that it was taking advantage of, which was a Trojan and the keylogger. It's basically a phishing attack. So they managed to get this code onto the Miami Dolphins summarising, I'm now going to come on to some of the more, from our perspective, the more dynamic stuff that's happening in the last few weeks and months. The first one I'm going to look at is the way in which code is being designed now to get beyond the URL filtering engines and the new technology that the URL filtering engine companies are coming out with called reputational databases. The concept between a reputational database is basically that they will go and visit many sites very, very quickly. In this particular example I'm using here, 80 million sites per day, and they will look at them not just because of a productivity liability issue, what would you categorize these sites at. They will also look at them from, well, okay, what else is on the page? Is there any malware on there? And generally speaking, they're looking at it using an antivirus engine. Unfortunately, as per information released by Gartner in March 2007, this is actually John Prescott, their chief security officer, that announced that the half-life of a phishing attack is now down to only 20 minutes. That's how long, on average, a phishing attack is residing on a website or web page before the authors remove it. And they're doing that to reduce the likelihood of getting caught. When you do the maths and just simply divide 80 million by 24 hours and then 3 to get to how many sites they're visiting in 20 minutes, you realise very quickly that they're actually visiting less than 2% of the sites that they're looking at within that 20-minute window. Another way of looking at it is they've got a 98% chance that they won't see the malicious code. When you actually turn it around and say, okay, so how many sites would a crawling database, reputational database product need to look at to be effective in this area? If you do a simple search in something like Google or Yahoo for subjects like sex or casino, you'll get between 200 and 400 million sites that actually come back to you as a result. When you actually work that up from, well, how many would you need to visit a day, it's somewhere between 14 and 28 billion sites that a crawling farm would have to visit. That's a significant investment that you'd have to make to try and make that technology work, to try and stop the modern-day crimeware and threats that are out there that have become so complex. What I'm actually going to show you now, though, is some stuff that we released only 2 days ago. I believe that it's one of the documents that BABTI are going to allow as a download after the event. It's our Q2 Web Trends report. Here you can see an evasive attack. An evasive attack is basically one that's being designed now to avoid detection. And it basically means that just because there's some malicious code on a page doesn't mean to say that you'd actually get attacked. The first stage in this is they actually keep a track of the actual IP address of the visitors to the particular web page or website. They're actually looking at malicious code in terms of a single view from a unique IP address. Once they've done that, they're also next trying to identify known IP addresses of the crawling farms that the URL filtering and reputational database companies are using. They're basically saying, okay, you're a crawling farm, I know you're a crawling farm because of the IP address range you're coming from, and therefore I won't deliver to you a payload. Here's some nice content, normal content. Since the attacks are designed to deliver a high rate of infection, there's no need to deliver the same code twice to a potential victim. So the next thing they're doing is saying, okay, well, I've got this IP address in here and you've already visited me once. I won't download the same code twice to you because the chances are it's probably someone doing a forensic analysis, maybe one of the people on this call, to see, well, how did this attack get onto this machine? And one of the steps of the forensic analysis will, of course, be to look at the URLs that the users visited. This next shot I'm showing you is a screenshot of a rootkit product designed to do this kind of evasive attack. The latest version of the attack are basically looking at the country you're coming from and also the user blocking. So in the middle here, you can see user blocking is turned on. That basically means if they've already seen the IP address once, it will not deliver the payload down the second time. The next one we're seeing here is country blocking. They've actually got it turned off in this particular version that we've managed to capture. And basically that means that they're saying, that's okay, I will still infect any country. But the ethos behind this is, well, maybe if you're coming from Korea or Singapore or a poor country, basically I don't want to infect you. It increases my likelihood of getting recognized and identified, and I probably can't make any money out of it. The next page I'm going to show you is an actual screenshot from this page, and what you've got to see here is that, or maybe you can't, depending on the resolution you've got, is that we're actually creating a random file name. And the HTML code connects a reference JavaScript right above the body tag, and the iltvv.js file name is random and changes each time for different users. In the next slide I'm going to show you, wait for it to come up, here's the actual code. It's obfuscated, and it delivers 3 attacks on the user in order to gain access to its PC and install a Trojan. If we go to the next page, basically this one, you can now see that the JavaScript is no longer referencing the source HTML. If you visit the second time, basically the code is no longer there. It's recognizing you already have the payload once. Why would I want to infect you twice? It's more likely that you're now trying to identify me. We go on to the next shot here. What I can show you again is a screen capture that we've grabbed, which is showing irrefutable proof that basically they are storing the IP addresses from the actual person visiting. So here you have a lookup for the client IP address. They're denying access to the code at this stage. They're logging the visitor the IP address into their database. They're denying access to the malicious code. So basically you can see from this, these evasive techniques, this is the latest thing that we've seen. It's actually incredibly difficult for a security firm to get their hands on this and to identify it, because basically you have to identify it the very first time you go there. You have to be able to see the whole thing. In summary, you have it's being designed to circumnavigate, it's like an anti-reputational database technology designed to get around people that are saying, okay, you're a crawler, or looking at specific geographies. They're doing selection parameters based upon where they're coming from. Do I want to infect or not? They're also doing target analysis on the cleverer versions of this and saying, okay, can I infect you? If someone's running an Apple Macintosh and doesn't have a vulnerability that they're able to take advantage of, they won't try and infect it, because again it increases the likelihood of getting caught. This is, in our opinion, one of the most interesting developments, and it shows a quantum leap really from where these people have been before. So in terms of threat conclusions, what we can gain from this, the first big one is that basically crimeware has arrived, and it's the financial gain is the motivator. We've gone from the time frame where fame was the thing that people were looking for, into now they're interested in making money. That's why when we look at proof from people like Sophos, which is one of Finjan's OEM partners, we look at that and say, okay, well, they saw 36 threats in 2004 that were rated as critical or severe. They only saw 17 in 2005, and they saw 0 in 2006. And that probably will ring true to the people on this call when we think about the threats we've seen in the last few years. You have the threats like I Love You, Anna Kournikova, Saza, Slammer. There's a big virus or threat each year that everyone remembers that year by. When you try and consider what's the big threat I remember for 2006, it's a bit of work. So financial gain is basically driving this, and in doing that, a couple of new things have appeared. We've got new innovation happening and new underlying principles. Historically, someone for fame wanted you to find about the virus. They wanted you to know about it, because unless you knew about it, you wouldn't report it to the antivirus vendor, and they wouldn't turn up into being one of the top 10 threats for that month. The underlying principles we have now is that, first of all, the crimeware is here, and there's a food chain developing extremely quickly in terms of people specializing on different parts of the food chain, some parts of which are obviously illegal, and some parts in different countries around the world may not be quite so illegal. The next underlying principle is it's all about avoiding detection for as long as possible. And because of that, when we're doing our audits, we're seeing all sorts of code coming in which is not being picked up by the antivirus vendor, is not being picked up by the URL filtering vendors, because this code is being deliberately designed and even QA'd against them to avoid detection. And that in itself is a complete opposite to worms and viruses, where worms are obviously trying to propagate onto a machine and off the machine as fast as possible, and the virus needs to know, it wants the person to know it's there, otherwise it doesn't get counted. The target audiences are being based upon objective and risk. What's their objective? Is their objective to try and steal money straight away from the individual by using a phishing attack? Is their objective that they're trying to get another zombie, increase their botnet? We've actually seen botnets for sale now, not just for sell full stop, but also for rent. to begin with, to drive distributed denial of service attacks on different areas, and obviously to get more phishing attacks out. So there is a whole subset of people out there creating botnets just so they can sell them to somebody else or rent them to somebody else, or then go and do it for their ill thing. Judicial systems are obviously a concern as well. I met with someone from Microsoft only 2 weeks ago, and he had a very interesting story about the Holiday Inn is full. And when he's talking about the Holiday Inn, he's talking about the UK jail system, which has got 60,000 beds in it, and it's full. And when you look at these types of crime, generally speaking, they are not types of crime that would force you, would have a conviction of going to jail. And if you did go to jail, you'd probably be out within a few months anyway. And they're also targeting smaller user communities. The common phrase we talk about is spear phishing, where there may be, now it's quite okay to try and attack someone with 200 or 300 or 400 users instead of going after one of the large high street banks. They're obviously also using social engineering, which we're seeing, and they're preying on ignorance, doubt, curiosity, and lack of ability or finances of people to do against that. So as I mentioned in the earlier example, no longer have we got a situation where, I've seen an email and it says it's from my bank and I know my bank won't sell it, send that to me. It's all sorts of different content and tax they're using, and they're quite happy if they only catch a few people each time. The next thing we see is the innovation, and the innovation I've shown you some of these threat techniques, or techniques that are being used, is quite extreme. So we've got innovative infection concepts coming out. They've got affiliation programs, things like the paper infections, where they'll create it, they give it to someone else, who then they can go and attack, and both parties make money. And they're also productizing of exploit code, and actually selling products. This will allow you to go and infect someone. We're also seeing the development of content, so it's not enough anymore that you have this piece of bad code. They're actually embedding it, they're creating movies, they're creating adverts, they're creating nice graphical websites, so that when they trick a user to going to that website with the socially engineered IM or email, that person basically then gets hit by a download from an ANI exploit or whatever's on that site. So we're seeing highly sophisticated techniques that are evolving in both their complexity and they're also accelerating. With only one slight exception actually, everything I've shown you today has been in the last 3-4 months. Generally speaking, we're not needing to look at anything that's going on in 2006. The next thing, of course, is that the attack overall is coming through multiple vectors. So you have the email vectors, the IM vectors to begin with. But the one common denominator under the whole thing is that web, port 80, is now being used as the payload vector. That's where what you do not want coming down to your PC or into your organization is being sent through it. It's no longer an email attachment. Both IDC, Gartner, and other analysts are all saying that there's more threats now coming down through port 80 than coming down through email. And the last bit here that you've seen it in the evasive techniques and the code obfuscation is that this whole drive now to create evasive attacks for the crimeware, which allow them to try and protect their investment. When they've made an investment of maybe $70,000 or even $100,000 as they're knitting together several different vulnerabilities, and on top of that, they're then developing all the content, the website, the whole mechanism, they're paying other people as part of that. They're trying to protect that investment, which is why they're using evasive attacks techniques. They're quality assuring their payloads against different antivirus products, where they're obfuscating the code to make it more difficult again, where they're trying to make a choice on whether to infect the target. So they're only trying to infect people that they can infect. They don't infect everybody. They identify who those targets are, and they only infect them based on whether they think they can actually make money out of them or not. They minimize the payload visibility, the Gartner example of only 20 minutes, so that basically the content is not residing there for very long. And they're actually taking a track and remembering the IP address, so there's no point in infecting the same person twice. I've already done what I need to do with that person. It's more likely to be someone investigating me and trying to figure out whether it came from me in the first place. And finally, they're detecting the IP addresses and content types of requests, types of information that the crawler is being asked to look for, to try and identify security labs, security research, and reputational services out there so that they don't provide the malware through to them. The second conclusion slide here, we're very nearly at the end now, so we can get it to move on. There we go. The second slide here, so basically the first thing I'm saying, I'm using here today are examples that we have gained from the market from our products installed on customer sites or on prospect sites in what we call an X-ray mode, which is a log or allow mode. What we do behind this is, when we see some interesting stuff, our malicious code research centre that is primary research will basically look at this, look at the complexity and what's going on with that attack to be able to gain things like the screenshots you're seeing today. The product as standard will stop these things straight out of the box with the default policy. We're also seeing that 80 to 90% of the threats and crime are identified in these prospect audits are not being stopped by antivirus and URL filtering engines. I'm sorry, I know that that's the majority of the techniques and technologies that most people on this course will be using, but that figure is absolutely true, and if you did an audit in your environment, I'm absolutely sure that that's the kind of range of stuff that we'll see coming through that's not being stopped by AV and URL filtering. The conclusion we have is that reactive technologies such as URL origin or signatures are not anymore capable of keeping up with the pace, because the window of vulnerability is actually extending, because today's person writing these kind of crimeware and threats, they don't want to get caught and they're hiding it, and it can take 4, 5, 6 weeks before the antivirus vendor gets a copy of the code, because it's been residing on a very small number of users' machines, just waiting for the first time that someone actually goes in there and puts www.hsbc or something. We believe the only way to cope with the new and advanced world attack techniques that we're seeing today is to identify the malicious code in real time, because when we look at things like the evasive attacks we're seeing, there are no second chances. We have one company that does it, but we believe that the primary method of stopping these kinds of attacks is to use real-time code inspection, which will actually look at the code in real time, look at the function calls and commands of the languages, and say, what is it you are actually doing? Completely irrelevant of where it's coming from or whether the product's seen it before or not. A few best practices, because Babs wanted a thought leadership approach to this presentation. We believe that you need to be able to technologically remove the user from the equation. Unlike email, where you can have a quarantine which says, well, were you expecting an email from Joe Blogs, and go and release it, the user has no clue whatsoever whether an ActiveX or JavaScript coming down to them is going to be malicious or benign. And of course you've got the syndrome out there where they're used to clicking yes. Do you want to do this? Yes. The next point we'd say on here is, again, that you need to take it away from the user, because there is actually no such thing as a safe site. Many people would have said, well, someone like the Miami Dolphins or the NFL are safe sites. But the reality is that there are people out there researching every single hour of every day vulnerabilities where they can try and infect a normal, reputable site with their infection. It can happen in seconds. Or they're using things like the advertising mechanism, so that a normal site which has been safe 99 times when you've been to it, it may have been sat there in your favourites. On the 100th time, it's got a piece of spyware there. They're also putting this code as the next thing is people are assuming that basically it's okay, I don't go to Russian or Eastern Bloc sites, I don't go to dodgy sites, I don't go to pornographic sites. It doesn't matter. This stuff is coming into sites which are usually medium-type sites, which are anything but categorised as pornography. And unfortunately, again, the social engineering part of don't click on an embedded URL doesn't work either, because most of the time it's not now a phishing attack with I am your bank that comes up on the screen. It could be anything. And you know from human logic that the weak point is the human person. Someone's going to sit there and go, that's interesting, and click on it. The one other thing we would say on best practice is, if any of the people dialing into this are from smaller organisations, we would highly recommend that you do not allow people that are doing business internet banking for small businesses to actually do any other form of web surfing whatsoever from those same machines that are being used for the internet banking, for the obvious reasons that a keylogger downloaded of that will not recognise any difference between HSBC personal account and HSBC business account. In the seminars we're doing with the Institute of Directors in a week's time, we've actually had a top barrister there going through an example of exactly how that happened to a medium-sized business in the States who are currently sat there $70,000 down in their cash flow. Although the account has been frozen in the Cayman Islands, they can't get the money back. We've also just included 2 or 3 slides here, we're coming to the very end now, of what you could do if you want to have a look to see whether this is a problem for your businesses or yourself. The first one here is graphic that we're showing of a movie clip, but we're actually going to be changing this same URL link in about 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now. We'll actually have an ability so you can move your mouse onto these different objects, which will spin around, and behind each one of these we'll have a textual security, which won't download any payload. It will just find out whether we could download a payload with any of these techniques that we're talking about. So as I say, in about 2 to 3 weeks' time, this link will be live. By all means, go to it now if you want to show any of your colleagues. This is actually a movie file on there that will go through all the different attack techniques that I've been talking about. This next slide I'm going to show you is these are actually printable reports coming straight out of our products when we do audits of people. They're all done for free. We'll basically come in, we'll install the product at the gateway, no cost involved. We'll ensure that you're happy with what policies we're trying to do. It's run in an X-ray mode, which means that the user has no idea that it's actually happening, that it's an invisible mode. And at the end of it, we come back about 3 weeks later and go through all these different types of reports. And in fact, I think virtually every single slide I've shown you today has come from one audit or another where we've been able to say, and this is what we've seen on this site. The last one, because obviously you're going to go home tonight, we have a free product called Finjan Secure Browsing. The way this works is it's a little, very, very thin client that plugs into your browser. This actually helps in terms of a search engine. So your search engine, when it goes out and replies back with URL links, what the thin client will do is take that URL link, it will send it back out to one of our products, one of our appliances on the internet, which will then go immediately to that site at that very moment, and then reply back to the browser with whether we find anything malicious or not malicious on the site. And we just simply color code for you the URL into red or green, depending on whether we found something malicious on that page or not. So that's the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for attending and staying through the whole presentation, and hopefully we can move on to some questions.
Presentation mode is now disabled.
So Tim, thank you very much for that. I have just now unmuted all the lines, so if you want to ask Tim any questions, please go ahead.
Well, there's no one else seems to be asking anything about something, which is if something comes in through port 80 onto one of the, say, a PC acting on network, a corporate network, will that propagate across the network to other PCs?
It could do. I mean, at the moment,
I know it could do, but are they actually writing it in that way? These keylogs and stuff, are they also propagating?
No, they're not. We imagine that's going to be one of the next things to do, and what we're very worried about at the moment is the propagation techniques we're showing you today have come along in quantum leaps in terms of sophistication over the last 6 to 9 months. At the moment, the actual payload that's attached to the very end of that is just a very simple keylogger or some Trojans to try and turn the machine into a zombie. But you could basically put any payload you can think of onto the end of these particular techniques. And we imagine that the distributed networking versions of phishing attacks is something that will happen in the second half of this year.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, Andy Moore, is there any variation in the security using different browsers?
No, unfortunately. Well, yes and no. As you're all aware, people or the vulnerabilities that are usually coming out are mainly towards IE, but in every single audit that we're looking at, I think there was a slide in the middle of the presentation here, I'm not sure if Lisa could go back to it, but basically we're seeing Mozilla browsers being targeted in every single audit. There are also another common exploit we're seeing in every single audit is one where it takes advantage of a vulnerability that allows them to look at the content in your clipboard. And they can actually, if you imagine the last thing any of you have cut and pasted today, that vulnerability would allow them to grab that one. Thank God it's only the last one, but the last thing you copied and pasted they could grab. They're obviously aiming for the lazy person doing the financial details, the password for PayPal or Amazon or a bank, but inadvertently they're grabbing all sorts of confidential information from businesses which would impact on all sorts of regulatory and compliance issues.
Right. Is there any move towards stopping the outbound results of phishing attacks and collection?
Yeah, our product as standard will stop. When we put the product in, one of the side benefits of doing an audit is that we can identify machines that are trying to send this information out to known home sites as standard. So when we put it in, we can identify these machines for you so that you can go basically straight to that IP address or user's machine, and it will tell you what we're going to find there.
Right. Yeah. You were talking about how Finjan goes through and compares the code onto some of the antivirus sites. Have you done anything to see how the content filtering products like Smoothwall or Dan's Guardian, whether they're catching these things?
The majority of the products we're finding, obviously, we're an enterprise and corporate customer. We do have SME customers, but we do not sell to home users and things like this. The majority of the products that we are looking at that are implemented in implementations all the way up to 150,000 users are the standard antivirus engines and the URL filtering engines. So the answer is no, not really, but the technology that we use is a behavior analysis. We do real-time code inspection to see what the code is doing at that precise moment. And the antivirus engines and URL filtering in general, they don't do that. That's not how those technologies work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions at all? I know we're sort of running out of time, so if you wanted to ask them.
I suppose only one other thing quickly, which is the problem of too many things trying to run on a PC. One of the problems these days I find is that you've got a PC, but it's now got so much anti-this and anti-that and anti-the-other wire, checking everything as you open it, as you load it, as you download it, that you always need a crazy supercomputer on your desk to handle all this stuff running in the background to protect you.
Absolutely agree with you. Well, our product's not actually supplied as a desktop product. We have actually licensed patents that we own for doing technologies around sandboxing and looking at this kind of code inspection to Microsoft. Microsoft and Cisco are actually shareholders of Finjan, but our products that we sell are actually gateway products, and there are appliances which run these engines on top of them. They're scanning these pages in between 12 and 20 milliseconds a page, so way faster than the human eye can see. As I said, I have, in 5 years I've been in the company, I've sat in front of a huge number of people, and I've looked them in the eye, and I've said, we categorically can stop an attack that's targeted at you coming in the very first time into your organisation, because we don't need to have seen it before. We're looking to see what it's going to do. We compare that against a profile that you have, which says, I don't want code coming into my network doing all of the above, all of the below.
Then the challenge comes with, of course, with the mobile working, and as we deperimeterize, and people are starting to work some of the time from home, some of the time out in the field, etc. The question is how you do that, or do you always have to come in the VPN through the corporate gateway?
Historically, our customers have been doing that, going through a VPN for internal gateways, but we're actually broaching a number of different ISPs at the moment and talking to different managed service providers. So we're talking about companies that are looking to run this actually in the fabric itself and do clean pipe down. And at that point, you obviously have a business ISP that you're talking to. We've already got relationships gaining up with several, but you could talk to your ISP and say, look, we're very interested in you running this for us out in the cloud, so that basically when our laptops move out of our permeable membrane that used to be our perimeter to our home, or even when they're using things like PDAs, using Microsoft CE or any other flavour, they're actually protected. And that's one of the markets we see that's going to really explode in this whole area, because when you look at something like a PDA with the functionality of a phone built in, many of the botnets that are forming at the moment are obviously forming on home user machines which are turned off the large majority of the time. A mobile phone is turned on the majority of the time unless someone's in a meeting. You now have a mobile phone, it's almost like having a modem, which people, most big companies aren't using modems at home anymore, it's broadband. It's almost like having a modem attached to a product which cannot, because of its memory and resources, run standard antivirus products.
Mm-hmm.
So we see it as a massive market.
Interesting.
Excellent. All right. Did you want to just ask one more?
No, I was just going to comment that what you said about having the running this out in the cloud at the ISP level is probably the way it has to go. Because, I mean, for instance, the laptop that I'm accessing this through was an hour and a half ago connected over an ordinary broadband connection outside the perimeter. It's now connected into the local network here. Hang on, I just got sorry, I got 2 calls. Anyway, so I was just agreeing. Hang on. Hello? Hello? Can you hold on 1 second, John, please? Sorry. Hello, sorry. I better log off now.
Whoever you were, thank you very much. Very good.
So it's Merlin Earl.
Thank you, Merlin.
I actually saw your website. Anyway.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. Well, we are actually out of time, so I think we'll sort of round it up here. But on behalf of everyone that attended here today, I would like to thank Tim for his presentation. Hope that you all found it very useful. This presentation will be sent out to everyone that came on today. Plus, we have recorded it, so there will be a recording available from the NetFocus community. So you can look out for that in our content library. And obviously, we do have our discussion groups in the NetFocus community, so if anybody wants to go and discuss this further, they can do so. Likewise, there on the presentation, if you wanted any more information from Tim himself, you can contact him. But with that, I'd just like to wind up and thank everyone for attending today. And just to let you know that we have got our annual events for the community coming up in October. So we have NetFocus UK and NetFocus North America. Interestingly enough, both on the 2nd and 3rd of October. But on behalf of everyone today, thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much to Tim.